What's up guys, David here, and if you live in the US and you bought the Galaxy S7, like you may not know this, but Samsung sold you an inferior version of this phone. And this is despite charging you the same amount of money that they're charging other people in other countries for the better version. Now I know some of you guys may be sitting there thinking like, what are you talking about, Dave? I live in the US, I got the Galaxy S7, and it's a good phone. In fact, you yourself on Twitter said that you thought it had the best hardware on any smartphone in all of 2016. And yeah, that's true, okay? The Galaxy S7 is a good phone. In fact, it's a great phone wherever you buy it. But that doesn't change the fact that Samsung is selling an inferior version of it here in the US, along with a few other countries like China and Japan. So how exactly is the US version of the Galaxy S7 worse than the global version, which is sold pretty much everywhere else? There are a couple things actually, and the first is performance. So those of you who follow PhoneBuff know that we do performance tests, that's kind of our thing, and when we tested the US version of the Galaxy S7 against the global version, we found that not only is it slower in initially loading up applications, but it's also significantly worse in keeping those applications ready for you in the background, which overall equates to slower performance. Now, there are two different chipsets being used. So the US version has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 820 chip, whereas the global version that's sold everywhere else has an Exynos 8890 chip that's made by Samsung itself. And you know, at first glance you would think like, okay, well maybe the processor difference is the reason why one phone is slower. Like, I mean, that makes sense, but it turns out that's actually not the case. Later on, when we tested other Android phones with the same Qualcomm chip, those phones not only performed better than the US version of the Galaxy S7, but they also performed better, or at least some of them performed better than the global version with Samsung's own Exynos chip. So like clearly, the hardware wasn't the problem, right? The chipset difference wasn't the problem. It was really that Samsung just didn't optimize the US Galaxy S7 as well as they did the Exynos version. Now, if you really wanted to, you could make an excuse for Samsung and say like, well, they had two different chipsets to worry about. And obviously they were gonna put the emphasis on their own in-house chip. In fact, they were more familiar with that chip, so like it just makes sense that it performed better on their device than the Qualcomm chip. But here's the problem with the argument. Guess who was the exclusive manufacturing partner for Qualcomm to make the Snapdragon 820? Guess who won the contract that some analysts say was worth over $1 billion to make the Snapdragon 820 for Qualcomm? It was Samsung, okay? So they were very familiar with the Snapdragon 820 because they were the ones literally making it. So like you would think that Samsung would take some of that profit, take some of that knowledge about the chip, and make sure that the Snapdragon 820 on the US variant of the Galaxy S7 performed really, really well, better than any other Android phone out there, when in fact, it's the opposite, and like it doesn't make sense to me. But maybe performance isn't your thing, right? Not everybody has the need for speed. Not everybody wants a sports car. Not everybody cares about, 0 to 60 times. Some people just want a car that gets you to point A to point B, and they want to do it in a very fuel efficient manner. Here's the thing. The US version of the Galaxy S7 also has worse battery life. So there's publications online that did tests on both versions of the Galaxy S7, and they found that the US variant of the Galaxy S7 had battery life that was anywhere between like 20 to up to 70% less efficient than the global counterpart. Like that's a lot. Now I will say a big part of the difference here is due to the chipset, but at the same time, optimization was a factor since other Android phones with that same Qualcomm chip perform better than the US version of the Galaxy S7. So you live in the US, you buy a Galaxy S7 for the same price as anybody else in the rest of the world, and you're getting worse performance and you're getting worse battery life. Like you would think that would be it. As if they wanted to add insult to injury. It's all the carrier bullshit you have to deal with. It starts right when you get the phone. You get this box. On the international version, there's this nice little magnetic clasp that closes elegantly, and on the US version, the box has this little paper tab instead. And like, I'm not trying to make a big deal out of the box. It's not a big deal. You get the phone out of the box and you never see the box again. But like, it's the principle of it, right? Like, it's almost like the Samsung was just looking at these two different versions of the S7. They're like, you know what? For the global version that we sell everywhere else, we're gonna make sure we pay attention to detail and put this nice little magnetic clasp on there. Yeah, that'll be nice. But the US version, let's put a little paper tab that, it's a little cheap version, who cares? And then you pull the phone out of the box, okay? It's like, okay, wow, this is a nice phone, right? And it is. And then you turn it around and boom! What do you see? You see a big old tramp stamp logo on the back of your phone, okay? This doesn't happen on international versions, and it just wouldn't happen like going back to the car analogy, right? Imagine you buy your car, and before you drive it off the lot, the dealer's like, hey, hold on. Let us spray paint our logo real quick on the back of your car. Like, it just wouldn't happen. So you turn on the phone, and what are you greeted with? The first thing you see is a bunch of carrier apps that you just don't want. And yes, you could disable them, but even when you disable them, they're not completely off your phone. They're always gonna take up a little bit of your storage space. And then to top it off, right? Like, to top it all off, when a new version of Android comes out with all the new features and bug fixes, guess what? You're not gonna get updated to the latest version until like months after everyone else. Yeah, sure, other Android manufacturers do the same thing with carriers, right? They have all the bloatware and tramp stamps on there, but we're talking about Samsung, right? Like this is the biggest Android manufacturer, and their biggest competitor in Apple doesn't do that stuff. Like it doesn't matter if you buy an iPhone in California or if you buy it in Australia. I've done both. The unboxing experience is the same. You don't get tramp stamps, you don't get carrier bloatware, and updates roll out around the same time for everyone. Even Google, they went exclusive with Verizon this year with the Pixel, but that phone doesn't have a tramp stamp on it, doesn't have carrier bloatware. So like, what's Samsung's excuse? And you know, when you add it all up together, right, like the slower performance, the lower battery life, the delayed updates, and all the other carrier BS, like it's just hard to not feel like Samsung gave the US the short end of the stick when it came to the Galaxy S7. And honestly, I'm afraid that they're gonna do the same exact thing again with the Galaxy S8 unless we do something about it. And what can we do? Let's talk about it, right? Like talk about the issue on Facebook, tweet Samsung and tell them that you want an equal phone for an equal price. Tag me in your posts, I'm at PhoneBuff pretty much everywhere. I think if enough people know about the issue and Samsung knows that people know about the issue, they'll do the right thing, they'll step up to the plate, and they'll make sure that they offer the same great experience that they're offering to other people in other countries to people in the US. Equal phone for an equal price. That's all we ask for. Anyways, that is it for me in this video. Thank you guys for watching, and as always, I'll be keeping it real with you in the very next episode.